Hi everyone and welcome to One Autistic Person. This is the 35th video in a 50 video series that I'm doing going through the statements of the Autism Quotient. If you don't know, the Autism Quotient is a pre-screening tool that is often used as part of the assessment process for autism. And during the diagnosis process, everything needs to be kind of looked at as a deficit. And what I wanted to do with these videos was look at those questions and the answers to them, or statements and answers to them, that I gave, and try and flip the narrative a little bit and either look at them as a positive rather than a negative, a benefit rather than a deficit, or look at what mitigations we put in place in relation to these, and also looking at reasons why these things might happen and going a bit more in depth into it. As I say, this is the 35th video, so that means that this is the 35th statement on the Autism Quotient, and that is, I am often the last to understand the point of a joke. And for me, this is definitely agree. This happens all the time for me. So I have a strong and I'd say healthy sense of humour, but it is quite specific, and some could see it as limited, I suppose, to certain subjects or certain experiences. One of the biggest things I think that comes from this is sarcasm, and my dealings with sarcasm, I refer to them as my sarcastic. I was going to say psychotic. My sarcastic dichotomy. I'm good at being sarcastic, but often terrible at understanding sarcasm in others. I think as with most of my literal and rigid thinking, it comes down to context, or my perceived lack of context, which is what I'm going to kind of touch on first and look at that, and then I'm going to look at a few different things, because I think this covers more than just jokes. I think this covers a lot of literal and rigid thinking, and how my brain and how neurodivergent brains may work in certain situations relating to context and shared experience. So what I'm going to do first is sort of look at what I mean when I'm looking at context and shared experience. So we'll have a look at that first. So in this first section, I'm going to look at what I feel, for me, is the reason why jokes can be complicated and difficult, and why there is that dichotomy of having a good sense of humour and finding some things funny and not finding others funny, and but also being able to be sarcastic. That is a huge thing for me, being able to be sarcastic but not understanding other people being sarcastic. There's obviously reasons why. I will go into that a little bit more, but there's various reasons when I think it comes to sarcasm. I think sarcasm is when people say it's the lowest form of wit, it actually takes a lot to understand sarcasm. But jokes are all about context, in my view. So whether it is sarcasm, a dad joke, or a complex joke, it requires shared context. So there needs to be an understanding of what context that joke is in. And if you're both not experiencing something in the same way, then context can be seen completely differently. My context to a situation could be completely different to somebody else's without somebody explaining that context to me. And I think many autistic people feel like this, and I certainly do, that I need more context generally within things. If somebody is telling me a story or asking me a question, I need more context to those things anyway, and the same comes with humour. I need context to the humour. The other thing that is often required is the need to read a person's social cues, especially when the joke is unexpected or not in the context of the current situation, or that I perceive it as not in the context to the current situation. And I believe this is also why I have so many issues with, again, sarcasm. I'll specifically look at sarcasm in a second, but those social cues of understanding somebody's joking, if I don't know them well, I might not understand that it's a joke. And sometimes with my housemate or family members, I'll know they're joking, but I'm not getting why the joke is what the joke means, because I have picked up on the fact that they're being humorous within the social cues that I understand of that close relationship, but I don't understand why, because it's not in context to the current situation. And finally, shared experience that has a mutual understanding of how the person experienced the subject of the joke, and often how it made them feel. So because of the fact that I experience the world differently, that means that I might not find something funny that somebody else does in a given situation, or that many people find funny in a given situation, because I've experienced that thing differently, or I felt something different, or due to alexithymia have been confused by that feeling. So therefore, a joke about being confused about my feelings, I probably understand more than feeling a certain way about something. So yeah, it needs that shared experience, not just shared experience, but mutual understanding of how the person experienced the subject and how it made them feel. So there's a lot of complexity there from a social perspective, and a lot of sharedness that maybe it's a bit difficult to have if it's not somebody else who's neurodivergent. So and I think this is why I think I get jokes made by other neurodivergent people, and I feel that often people who are neurodivergent will get my jokes more than somebody who is neurotypical, because I feel like I've got that shared experience with that person, and they're coming from it from a way that I may be similar to their thinking. I'm not saying the same, but that I may have similar experiences to situations as that person. This doesn't just cover joking, but also idioms and metaphor, which is what I want to look at. So I'm going to look at sarcasm specifically, and I'm going to look at idioms and metaphor, because I feel like they're all kind of linked together in this literal thinking side of things, and why if we don't get them, if you struggle with this as an autistic person, I think it all links back to those things again. It comes down to context, shared experience, and social cues, and I think all of those things have a part to play in all of those areas. So I'm going to have a look at sarcasm first, and then we'll go into metaphor and idioms, and then metaphor. So first of all, let's have a look at sarcasm. So like I said with sarcasm, I call it my sarcastic dichotomy, that I am able to be sarcastic, and apparently it's funny when I do it. People laugh, people see it, and it could be quite dry in the way that it is. And people seem to get it when I do it. So maybe they don't need the social cues as much as I do to be able to know that it is sarcasm. And I think because sarcasm quite often comes across as sort of like a bantery type thing, or it can be seen as being cruel or unkind, I think I'm not used to people being, when I was a kid, because I was bullied so much at school, I think, and that I've had issues throughout my life with social interactions where that's been the case, that I think that I automatically go to it not being that, and because I'm not picking up that it not being sarcasm, that it's being serious. And even with people around me, if I'm feeling uncomfortable for whatever reason, I've had a bad day out at work, or I've had something else has happened that's made me feel overwhelmed, or my senses aren't balanced, or something's not right with me at that moment, I will take sarcasm seriously, even from somebody who's really close to me, who I know that they probably are being sarcastic. I have to ask probably 1 in 5 times from my housemate whether he's being sarcastic, because I'm not sure, and he is extremely sarcastic. So I always have to make sure that is the case, because I automatically take it personally, and then I usually skip straight to no, it's just being sarcastic. And I try my best to make sure that I stay in that sarcasm area with my housemate, and then he'll tell me if he's not being sarcastic. I'd rather that than get upset over the fact that I think he's not being sarcastic when he is. But then I can be extremely sarcastic. I understand sarcasm, I understand the concept of it, and I understand the need for it. I think that it has a positive effect on relationships if both people. It shows a complete understanding of somebody with sarcasm. It shows that you understand that person well. You have to know them well, in my view, to be sarcastic, although people seem to be able to be sarcastic with each other when they don't know each other well, whereas me, it needs that close relationship, because I need to know that it is sarcasm. Otherwise, I do take it to heart. Even if I take it as sarcasm at the time, I then play it over in my head afterwards, thinking, was that sarcasm or was it not? And I have now what I do from a mitigation perspective, because I'm not going to go into mitigations right at the end like I usually do with a separate part in this. I'm going to put them into each bit, if there are them. But with mitigations with this, I just ask somebody now, just to make sure you were being sarcastic, weren't you? And I know it breaks the fact that sarcasm happened, but I let the sarcasm, if it is sarcasm, be there, and the laughing bit, and then sort of like afterwards just have that, just making sure that was sarcasm and everything's okay, isn't it? Because it tends to be in a work environment for me that sarcasm happens and I'm not sure about it. So what I'll do is I'll do the laughing stuff, and then I'll just speak to the person afterwards briefly and say, just to make sure that there wasn't any truth behind that, was there? It was just sarcasm. And 9 times out of 10 the person says yes, but it also does actually open up a conversation that it might not be, and if there's an issue then they'll say it. So I actually quite enjoy sarcasm. Giving sarcasm, should I say, being the sarcastic person, I actually quite enjoy, and I wish I could enjoy the rebuttal of it more, because I know that it's funny and I know it's meant to be, and I know it's only meant to be in a joking way, but my automatic reaction is always to take it to heart, and it does batter me, and it is a frustration. And I think the thing is, just try and take it, like I say, just if you think it's possibly sarcasm, take it as sarcasm, and then if you don't think it is, have a word with the person, or say to them sort of like, or hopefully they'll tell you if it wasn't. But then that comes with its own social complications, because do they not tell you because you took it as sarcasm? But there are ways of doing that, like I say, speaking to the person if you truly feel like there might be a possibility that it isn't, and I do feel like most of the time that it's not, so that's what I've chosen to do now. When it comes to just while we're in the sort of jokey sarcasm side of things, like dad jokes, I understand the fact that they're meant to be funny, so I can just be like ha ha ha, because I know that's what it is. And again, my housemate is a nightmare for dad jokes. I like complex jokes. I like complex jokes that make me think a little bit before I laugh at it. So like sort of like a realization of the thing why that was funny. I enjoy comedy, and I think a good way of being able to understand comedy in general is just watch as much different type of comedy that you can deal with, because obviously, like I say, not a fan of the dad jokes, not a fan of sort of that, like those old school kind of jokes, whereas I know some people love them. But if you want to sort of understand humour more, maybe watch more things that you don't necessarily find funny and see why, if that's something you want to do, and see why people are finding those things funny. And think why, from a literal thinking perspective, why that would be funny, I suppose. You can sort of break through then to maybe understand that it was a joke, and even if it's just masking a little bit of going, I'm not a fan of masking, but just laughing at something, it's a little mask. That's a little mask that's kind of just like, and then move on. So yeah, but I found sarcasm the most complicated one of all of them, and the one that frustrates me the most, because I take it so to heart. Yeah, I want to have back and forth of sarcasm, and I can with my best friend, who is also neurodivergent. We can be extremely sarcastic to each other, and I don't take anything he takes seriously, and vice versa. We don't take things seriously with each other, because clearly our social cues are similar in the way that we communicate, and also the fact of our humour is very similar, because our shared experience is very similar. So that's very... And also we talk a lot about the similar things, so we understand each other's sarcasm. So I think that's clear that there is context and mannerisms and social cues all come into how somebody perceives a joke, and certainly sarcasm. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a little look at idioms and then metaphor. So first of all, let's have a look at idioms. Now, idioms, for me, the problem with them is that they are all about context and all about the history of something. And quite often, the history of something that's been put together, that was put together from a nuance in the past that has potentially changed over time. So by the time you're using that idiom, it's made giant leaps. And the thing is, I think what happens generally is people just accept the fact that that's what the idiom says, and they'll just accept the fact that that's what it is, and they'll relate it to the thing that it's meant to be about, and they won't be confused by why it's that way. My brain gets very, very stuck in why does blood is thicker than water, as I did in a previous video. What does that mean? It makes no sense whatsoever. It now makes more sense to me. There are certain ones that sort of like make sense, like being caught red-handed is very clear. But when it's like raining cats and dogs, why cats and dogs? My brain was like, why is it cats and dogs? And apparently it's because they potentially think it's because of, again, it's not definite, so then that frustrates me, because it's like it might not definitely be that. But apparently cats and dogs used to hide in the rafters, so when it rained heavily, and the cats and dogs would all come out of the roofs, and that's why it would be seen as it's raining cats and dogs, because sometimes they'd fall off the roofs. So that's where it comes from, and that makes absolute sense that that's where it is, and that's a great idiom, and I love understanding them. So I really enjoy researching the etymology and cultural linguistics of idioms, and it kind of solidifies it in my mind. But I find the reason for it existing confusing, and I become really hyper focused on why and trying to work it out, which is really distracting when you're trying to have a conversation and somebody's used an idiom that you haven't heard before, or one that you haven't researched, and you're kind of going, why does that mean that? And it could it be this, and could it be this? And then I'm trying to think of all various different cultural reasons for why that could be the case. And quite often I haven't got the context for me to look at where it came from, so then I can't look it up. Sometimes I can make that link and I'm right. It's rare because there's usually, like I say, multiple leaps that you would have to take in language to understand it, and sometimes reversals of meaning and all sorts of things that can mean that something that meant something once no longer means that, and it means the reverse of what it used to mean. And yeah, so I don't dislike idioms. I actually really love idioms. I think they're a really great quirk of language, but I don't understand them, and it's not about, so I don't even think it's a matter of not understanding them. I think there is the frustration of not understanding where it comes from, and I can't link it to that thing that it means until I know the reason why it's linked to that. So it's not I obviously understand those words go together, but I can't. It's a link thing. And it's bugged me trying to work out why idioms are so complicated for me, and understanding the fact that I research them to such a great extent is making me realise it's that link. I need to know why something is the way it is. I can't just be okay with something just being the way it is, and that runs through everything in life with me. So when people at work say it's just the way it is, it's always been like this, those things frustrate me, and I think it's very similar when it comes to idioms. So that's and like I say, it's very much about context and having the understanding of where something came from. And I do enjoy doing the research on it, and I then enjoy using it once I have an understanding of it. So yes, that's that's idioms. And then let's have a look at metaphor. And the mitigation with that is going to be, realistically, research as many idioms as you possibly can. There are books you can get that tell you about idioms, and if you are the same as me and you need to make that link, maybe just researching as many of them as possible, and they have sort of become a little bit of a special interest for me, and I do enjoy looking at the etymology, like I say, of them. So I love language, so that's an add on to that. So yeah, it's that would be my mitigation, or my way of dealing with the situation is researching it, and looking into the reasons why. So as I said before, let's look at metaphor. Now, metaphor, on the flip side of idioms, I use metaphor myself. Again, it is similar to sarcasm. I use metaphor myself because it is a way of being able to explain something kind of visually in words. So you're able to describe something in a way that somebody can understand. So I use metaphor myself, but again, I struggle with other people's metaphors quite often. It definitely requires shared experience and understanding that is in sync with the other person. So you've got to have that shared experience of something for somebody to be describing something to you that to them is similar to their experience. And again, if you are experiencing the world differently, I get lost in metaphor very quickly, because quite often I'm not making the same links that other people are making. Again, when I give metaphor to Sam, my best friend, he will understand generally what I mean, and I will understand what he means, but other people can get very confused by why I'm using the metaphor that I'm using, and vice versa. I get very, very lost in my housemate's metaphor. He goes on about metaphoric things all the time. He talks in riddles quite often to me, and I think that's because he just thinks so differently to the way his brain works, completely differently to the way that mine does. And we believe that he is neurodivergent, but we believe it's ADHD and not autism, and therefore it, I think, works very differently most of the time. Sometimes I get it, don't get me wrong, sometimes I do get it, but it tends to be if it's on something we have a shared experience of. I can't make a link of shared experience with somebody if I haven't experienced it the same way. So again, I've kind of come to the conclusion that metaphor really does require shared experience, but also understanding of that, how that experience felt for that person, or how they understand that experience. Like I say, I can use metaphor, and I do often, but usually to describe something I'm pretty sure is shared experience. And what I also do as well, I think I overqualify understanding of a metaphor. So I don't just give a metaphor of something basically. I will give a really detailed explanation of what I mean by the metaphor that I'm saying. And I'll kind of over-explain not like me, to over-explain what the metaphor is going to be about, so that people understand what I'm talking about when the metaphor happens. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Basically, all of this comes down to context and shared experience, as I've said. And I think that all of these things are sort of intrinsically linked to one thing about how, if this is how your brain works, then I think this is why all of these things are problematic for us, because of the fact that they all require that shared experience, the same context, the understanding of each other's feelings in a situation, social cues on certain things, and all of those things, if you put them all together, make it extremely difficult to read something that isn't straightforward. But the thing that's always the thing that's always confused me has always been that I can get it with some people, but not all. Most people I don't. Some people I do. And the fact that I can do these things, that I can use an idiom once I understand it. I can be sarcastic, and I can use metaphor. I can use them, and I think use them well, but I can't receive them in the same way. And I think that's because of the fact that it all definitely comes down to the fact that I just completely experience the world so differently to somebody who's neurotypical, or even somebody else who is autistic who experiences the world differently to the way that I do. So it's really interesting to think about it from the fact that, from a neurodiversity perspective, not a neurodivergent perspective, but the diversity of a person's neurology, that it really does require, all of these things require such specific experiences to be lived in the same way and felt the same way as each other, for you to truly feel that you can understand somebody with these things, and that they are beneficial to each party, or that they are understood clearly from each party. So yeah, I just wanted to do an interesting one with this, on the sort of, like, it really got me thinking about literal thinking and not being able to think between the lines, and where that is kind of looked at as a deficit, and it's not, it's just different. But I suppose if it's that, 90, potentially 95%, 98% of the population, I can't understand when they're doing these things, then that makes it extremely complicated. I don't think it's as much as that. I think there are neurotypical people who I would understand. I think that there are neurotypical people who would say something sarcastic, and I would get it for whatever reason, or they may say a metaphor in a way that I would understand. It doesn't mean that just because you're neurotypical, you're neurodivergent, that you're not going to be able to have those experiences or be able to give something for them to understand it. But I think in the main part, those experiences have to be understood syncretically. They need to be in sync with each other, and there's lots of things that need to be in sync with each other. And there's also the added thing of the fact that I need to understand why something exists, or why something's happening, or why somebody said something, and I overthink, that all make all of those things much more complicated as well, because I will then overthink them afterwards, and especially when it comes to sarcasm. So that's my first video since the new year. I'm hoping to be doing these again probably every other day. I'm going to try and do every day, but I know that I try to do that and I always end up doing it every other day. So I'm going to sort of settle, I think, on every other day. Thank you very much. And as always, please tell me what you think about how you experience sarcasm, idioms, metaphor. I want to do some more videos specifically about this, where it's not one of these looking at the autism quotient. That's what I don't want to be necessarily looking at it from that perspective. I want to go into more detail in other videos, is what I'm saying. Sorry, my cat is deciding that he's going to scratch the thing I'm sat on, which is very, very off-putting. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about these things, and how you experience them, and why you feel that you experience them the way that you do. And as always, if you could subscribe, that's great, because it really does push out my videos to more people. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks. Bye.